Like many of you, I watched Apple's announcement of their new ARM-based M1 SoC in the new MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and Mac Mini. So this likely isn't the first video you've watched on this subject, nor am I a mega huge channel, so welcome to Off-Broadway YouTube. I truly appreciate allowing me your time and the chance of earning your subscription. Competition in this space is not lost on me, and I truly appreciate it. But back to Apple's M1. I purposefully waited a few days before making this video. I think overall it's wise to wait for some of the dust to settle after such major announcements before blindly wrapping our lips around a tech giant's teat. So, here are my thoughts on the M1 and the current launch lineup. Before we start, these are largely my own opinions. Contrary to how most information is presented to you these days, my opinions are not gospel intended to convert you or change your mind. I simply offer them for your consideration so that after consuming other people's opinions, you have a more well-rounded idea to form your own. While overall I think the big picture of Apple launching the ARM-based M1 will have a revolutionary and beneficial impact on the entire industry, which we'll get into later, as with any paradigm shift, I think it's important to consider some of the impacts of early adoption. So here are just some of the things to consider before spending hundreds, even well over $1,000 to live on the bleeding edge. First, this is 100% personal and subjective. I had my fingers crossed for months that the M1 would have been offered in the 12-inch MacBook at launch. To me, it would have made all the sense in the world to relaunch the 12-inch MacBook and use it as more or less of an M1 testbed for several months, possibly a year, while third-party software developers catch up with recoding their software to run on ARM. Then, when major developers like Avid, Adobe, and others have the code buttoned up, Apple could launch product lines like the M1 or M2 MacBook Pro to really blow our nips off with performance improvements across all applications, not just native applications like Final Cut and iMovie. All of that said, however, I do get why they launched M1 with the MacBook Air. It is one of the best-selling laptops in the world, and more ensures their new M1 SoC saturating the market and forcing the issue on third-party developers to get on board with recoding. Which brings me to my next concern. Emulating legacy x86, x64 software through Rosetta 2. For the unforeseeable future, most legacy applications are going to run worse on M1 through Rosetta 2, despite Apple suggesting that some legacy software actually runs faster. Yeah, the jury is still out on that last claim until we see real-world benchmarks and use cases. There's a reason for the vague claims that don't cite specific examples. Just like the claim that the M1 MacBook Air is up to 3 times faster than the best-selling Windows laptop in its class. What class? Price? Form factor? And 3 times faster at doing what exactly? Just keep that intentional vagary under your hat while you think about Apple earning your $1,000 at launch. On to the next concern. Don't get me wrong. I think Apple's goal of unifying app support across iPads, iPhones, and personal computers is awesome. But that just makes me extra baffled they haven't finally given the Pro or the Air a touchscreen. Most of the unified apps are designed for touch screens, not a keyboard and mouse. I say I'm baffled, but not really. As usual, following the money holds the answer to most corporate questions. Apple still wants you to buy iPads. Just because an iOS app is technically available on a MacBook Air doesn't mean you'll use it. It's designed for touch input, so you'll still need your iPad. And Apple knows this. They aren't stupid. Another issue to consider is that the transition to ARM means no more boot camp, no more dual booting into Windows. At least, not for now. Something tells me that might change over the next year or so. It's kind of arbitrary. Since Apple announced their intention to move to in-house ARM processors, that's why I think Microsoft has been so actively developing Windows on ARM, up to and including testing the waters on Snapdragon-based devices like the Samsung Galaxy Book S. It wasn't that Microsoft expected the Galaxy Book S to be a hot seller, but more like a public beta for coding a flavor of Windows to run on ARM, fully anticipating Apple's move to ARM. I think Microsoft started the legwork on Windows on ARM partly so that it will eventually be compatible with Apple's new SoC. If my gut is correct, and I'm not saying it definitely is, I wouldn't be surprised to see a form of boot camp return at some point down the line. Now, something else Apple didn't mention is dropping support for external GPUs via Thunderbolt. If your workflow depended on hooking your MacBook to an external graphics card, you've now got some very expensive paperweights. My intuition tells me Apple did this out of easing the burden of releasing updates to support newer AMD and NVIDIA GPUs, and instead simplify by relying on their own integrated GPUs. Which brings me to my next point. The integrated GPU on the M1 SoC is either 7 or 8 core, which is really weird. It's so odd that you have to choose between 7 or 8 cores. It seems so arbitrary. This makes me and others in the tech community think that the 7-core GPU M1 SoCs are just imperfect M1 chips. Silicon varies in quality, so some chips come out better than others. More simply, electrons flow more easily through higher quality or higher binned chips. So the lower quality M1 chips simply having that 8th GPU core disabled to make sure the other 7 and the rest of the chip run efficiently, it's really a brilliant move on Apple's part. Though not at all uncommon among any chip maker. Speaking of the GPU, the RAM is also contained within the SoC, which as far as latency and throughput is considered, is awesome. It also means that it is shared with the integrated graphics. The reason I mention this is that since it is shared, a good way to boost GPU performance will likely be to upgrade the RAM from 8GB to 16GB. That way, all of the sections of the SoC, like the GPU and the neural engine, have plenty of access to plenty of memory. SoCs typically do way better with less memory, but few if any ARM SoCs will be pushed as hard as an M1. Just keep that in mind. Moving on a bit, I adore that the MacBook Air is now fanless. Since I work heavily with audio, I am a silence freak. That said, the 12-inch MacBook was fanless. All the more reason I personally wish the first M1 device was actually a renewed 12-inch MacBook line. Now, the rest of my concerns are a bit nitpicky. Even though the image processing has been improved, I am still mind-boggled that the webcam is 720p across the board. iPhone cameras can see an alien mosquito taking a dump on the moons of Jupiter, yet MacBook webcams, and all webcams for that matter, are still filth. And look, I get it. They just need to be good enough to Zoom, Skype, and FaceTime. But while you're touting your recording studio grade microphones and speakers, why can't you slap in at least an old camera from the iPhone 4? Hey, check out how amazing our screens, speakers, and microphones are. But here's a potato for the camera. It'll look extra potato on that great screen. Now, before you obliterate your keyboard in response to what I just said, I know webcams usually use USB protocol and phone cameras use an entirely different, more direct connection with the image processor. But still, I am sure Apple, of all companies, could figure out a way to patch a high-quality webcam to the SoC in a similar way, if not the same. It's just funny, especially on the MacBook Pro. Check out how pro everything is, except for the dumpster fire webcam and I/O. And to the point of I/O, particularly on the MacBook Pro. Have fun with only 2 Thunderbolt ports on a device bearing the name Pro on it. Hello, professional, with your high-capacity SD cards and backpack full of peripherals. Enjoy no SD card slot and only 2 USB Type-C ports. Again, not a gripe with the Air, but more glaringly obvious on a device that says Pro right on the machine itself. I'll start wrapping it up here. I can't tell you whether or not you should buy an M1 Mac today. I can only offer this video of my opinion on what to consider before you do. Some of you will realize that not much of these factors are critical to you and you'll be perfectly happy with an M1 Mac. Others might consider things like the lack of external... I just spit? Others might consider things like lack of external GPU support and iffy launch legacy software support to be non-starters. Whether or not you should buy boils down to your specific needs, so keep that in mind as you consider the points I've presented. Now, I want to finish by briefly mentioning what I meant when I said that, in my opinion, the M1 isn't amazing because of what it means to Apple, but because of what it means to the entire industry. ARM processors are by no means new, but the M1 marks a major paradigm shift when one of the biggest companies in the history of humanity shifts from x86 to ARM, from CISC to RISC, in mainstream personal computing. Apple moving to ARM isn't a pebble sending a ripple through the pond, it is the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs. Software developers are now more than ever forced to code or recode for ARM if they want juicy contracts with Apple. The reason why this is so exciting to me is that once software is coded for ARM on the M1, and this is oversimplified and figuratively speaking, a few lines of code away from the Snapdragon, Exynos, and ARM-based single-board computers like Raspberry Pi. It is one step closer to truly unified computing, not just for Apple, but for the entire industry. One day soon, hopefully, we'll be able to pair our phones with virtually any screen, a Bluetooth keyboard, and get real work done with the same unified software running on our home and office PCs. You'll have a new option to leave your laptop at home if you don't need it. And options are great. You've got the exact same software on the device in your pocket. Now I'll keep myself in check here. We are a little ways off from that future if it happens at all. If it doesn't happen though, it won't be because of technical hurdles, but of course legal and contractual. Bureaucratic hurdles, basically, as usual. But I wouldn't be a geek if I wasn't at least technologically hopeful, would I? I really hope you enjoyed this video and found some of it helpful. Like I said at the beginning, I truly appreciate your time visiting me here on the off-Broadway of YouTube. We are all geeks about something, so embrace your inner geek. And more importantly, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love, and you are worthy of receiving love. And more critically, you are worthy of your own self-respect. Never forget that. You are worthy of your own self-respect. Thank you so much for your time. If you'd like to just consider subscribing, I would truly appreciate it. And you can find links to my podcast below in the video description. Take care.